Picture a typical December morning. The air is crisp. There's like a hint of snow in the air.
Oh,
The year is 2009. We're in West Valley City, Utah.
yeah.
And a young family is getting ready for church. Susan Powell, a bright, loving 28-year-old mother, is making sure her two little boys, Charlie and Braden, are bundled up for the cold. It seems like, an ordinary Sunday, just a snapshot of family life. But later that day, this picture of normalcy would be totally shattered. Susan disappears, vanishing, like without a trace, leaving in mind a mystery that would spiral into this dark and twisted tale of suspicion, family secrets, and just unimaginable heartbreak.
It's a case that just grabbed, national attention. Not just for the mystery surrounding Susan's disappearance, but also for the unsettling details that emerged about her marriage, her husband's odd behavior, and a family dynamic that just seemed, well, anything but ordinary.
Welcome to CrimePod Castle's Twisted Crime series. When someone vanishes like that, it's like a ripple effect, you know what I mean? The shockwaves spread out, touching everyone who knew them. And in this case, the ripples reached far beyond Susan's immediate circle.
Absolutely. And what makes the Susan Powell case so gripping is that it began like so many missing person cases. But as investigators peeled back the layers, they uncovered a tangled web of secrets and lies that pointed to something much more sinister.
Yeah, let's start with the basics. Susan was last seen alive on December 6th, a Sunday. She attended church with her family that morning, even had a neighbor stop by later in the day. But by that evening, she was gone. Her husband, Josh, claimed he had taken their two young sons, Charlie and Braden, on a spontaneous camping trip in the middle of the night, in December, in Utah. It just seems strange.
It certainly raised eyebrows right from the start. I mean, the weather was freezing, there was no prior planning, and to take such young children out in those conditions, it just didn't add up for investigators.
And then there was Josh's demeanor. He seemed oddly detached, unconcerned about his missing wife, almost as if her disappearance didn't faze him. Like, wouldn't you be frantic, desperate to find your spouse?
Yeah, that lack of emotion, that absence of the expected frantic worry, became a major red flag for investigators. It was like a crack in the facade, hinting at something darker lurking beneath the surface.
Right. And as investigators dug deeper into the Powell home, they uncovered even more unsettling details. Susan's purse, her cell phone, her keys, all left behind. It's like she's simply vanished into thin air. And then there's that damn spot on the carpet, the one Josh was frantically trying to dry with fans. It felt like he was trying to erase something, to hide evidence.
These weren't just random isolated details. They were pieces of a puzzle starting to form a very disturbing picture. The missing personal items, the frantic cleaning, it all suggested that Susan didn't leave voluntarily, that something terrible might have happened inside that house.
And then there was the troubled marriage. On the surface, Susan and Josh seemed like any other young couple. But beneath the facade, there was turmoil, financial strain, and a growing sense of unease that Susan confided to friends and family.
Right. Their relationship was far from perfect. There were whispers of financial problems, mainly stemming from Josh's spending habits, and friends and family started sharing stories about Josh being controlling and manipulative towards Susan, painting a picture of a relationship marked by tension and an imbalance of power.
It's heartbreaking. Susan had actually confided in friends about her fears, feeling trapped and increasingly worried for her safety. It's chilling to think that her concerns, those whispered fears, might have foreshadowed the tragedy that was about to unfold.
It's a tragic reminder of how domestic abuse often operates behind closed doors, hidden from public view. The abuser can exert control and manipulate their partner, leaving them feeling isolated and afraid. In Susan's case, those whispered fears became a chilling reality.
And, as if the marital problems weren't enough to raise suspicion, there was another layer to this family drama that made the case even more unsettling. Josh's father, Steven Powell.
Steven Powell's involvement added a whole new dimension of creepy to this case. His unsettling obsession with Susan wasn't exactly a secret.
Yeah, it was more than creepy. It was downright disturbing. He kept journals and videos filled with fantasies about Susan, revealing an inappropriate infatuation with his daughter-in-law. Imagine living with that kind of scrutiny, that unsettling gaze constantly upon you. It must have been incredibly unnerving for Susan.
It's a dynamic that added immense pressure to an already strained situation. To have your father-in-law fixated on you in that way, it creates a suffocating atmosphere, a feeling of being trapped with no escape.
So we have a missing woman, a husband acting suspiciously, and a father-in-law with a disturbing obsession. As investigators delved deeper into Susan's disappearance, the spotlight remained firmly on Josh.
And with good reason. His behavior continued to raise red flags. He was evasive during questioning, changed his story multiple times, and seemed more focused on deflecting blame than on helping find his missing wife. His actions spoke volumes, fueling the suspicion that he knew more than he was letting on.
Then came a bombshell that shook the case wide open. A discovery that revealed a shocking truth about Steven Powell and painted the entire Powell family in a new, unsettling light.
The discovery of Stephen Powell's secret collection was a turning point in the investigation. It wasn't just his journals and videos about Susan. Investigators uncovered a vast collection of voyeuristic materials, including images of young girls. It was a horrifying revelation that added another layer of depravity to the case.
It was a game changer. This wasn't just a creepy old man with a crush. This was something far more sinister. It made you wonder what else was going on in that household. Was Stephen's obsession with Susan just an infatuation? Or was something more sinister at play? And could he have been involved in her disappearance, directly or indirectly?
Those questions hung heavy in the air. The discovery of Stephen's collection cast a dark shadow over the entire Powell family, raising serious concerns about the environment Susan was living in and the potential danger she might have faced.
It also raised the stakes when it came to the safety of Susan and Josh's two young sons, Charlie and Braden. These boys were living in a home with their father suspected of involvement in their mother's disappearance, and a grandfather with a proven history of predatory behavior.
The situation was incredibly concerning. The boys were caught in the crossfire of a complex and disturbing case, their lives intertwined with the secrets and lies that were unraveling around them.
And that concern, that need to protect those vulnerable children, became the driving force in a custody battle that would ultimately lead to a horrific and unimaginable tragedy.
The fight for custody of Charlie and Braden would become a central chapter in the Susan Powell saga, a chapter filled with heartbreak, desperation, and ultimately an act of violence so shocking that it sent shockwaves through the nation. The custody battle for Charlie and Braden was fierce, just fueled by love, fear, and a desperate need to protect those innocent boys. Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, were determined to shield their grandsons from the toxic environment of the Powell family, convinced that Josh was involved in their daughter's disappearance.
Yeah, it was a heartbreaking situation. A family torn apart by tragedy and suspicion. You could feel the raw emotion in every court hearing, every plea, every desperate attempt to secure the safety of those children.
And the evidence against Josh wasn't helping his case. His behavior, the inconsistencies in his stories, the unsettling details found at the home, and the shadow of his father's disturbing actions, it all created a mountain of suspicion that was hard to ignore.
In the end, the courts sided with Susan's parents, granting them custody of Charlie and Braden. It was a huge victory for the Coxes, a chance to provide a loving and stable home for their grandsons, a place where they could heal and try to make sense of the chaos that had engulfed their young lives.
But that decision didn't sit well with Josh. He was furious, adamant about his innocence, and determined to regain custody of his sons. It was like a wound that wouldn't heal, a constant reminder of the life he had lost and the accusations he vehemently denied.
And despite losing custody, Josh was still granted supervised visits with Charlie and Braden. I imagine those visits were incredibly difficult for everyone involved. The Coxes, heartbroken and fearful for their grandson's safety, and Josh, clinging to the hope of reuniting with his children.
Yeah, those supervised visits were supposed to maintain a bond between father and sons. But they became a source of growing concern. Josh's behavior during these visits was increasingly erratic. He seemed detached at times, then angry, and some reports even described him as menacing. It was like a ticking time bomb, the tension building with every visit.
And the social worker, assigned to oversee those visits, started expressing serious concerns about Josh's mental state, sensing a potential danger to the children. It was a chilling premonition, a feeling that something wasn't right, that the situation was spiraling towards a breaking point.
And tragically, those concerns were tragically accurate. On February 5th, 2012, during a scheduled visit, Josh Powell committed an unspeakable act, taking the lives of his two innocent sons in a horrific murder-suicide.
It's hard to even talk about what happened that day. Josh locked the social worker out of the house, took his sons inside, and attacked them with a hatchet. Then he set the house on fire, engulfing himself and his sons in a fiery inferno. It was a scene of unimaginable horror, a senseless act of violence that left a community reeling and a nation heartbroken.
It was a culmination of years of turmoil, a final act of desperation controlled by a man who had lost everything and was consumed by anger, grief, and a twisted sense of revenge. It was a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of domestic violence and the lengths to which an abuser might go to inflict pain and exert ultimate control.
The news of the murder-suicide sent shockwaves through the country. It was a gut-wrenching end to a case that had already captivated and horrified the public for years. But while Josh Powell was ultimately responsible for the deaths of his sons, the shadow of his father, Steven Powell, continued to loom over the case.
That's right. Steven Powell, the man whose obsession with Susan had set in motion this chain of disturbing events, faced his own legal reckoning. After Susan's disappearance, authorities launched a separate investigation into his activities, and what they uncovered was truly disturbing.
He was like lifting a rock and finding a nest of vipers. Investigators discovered a vast collection of voyeuristic images and videos, many of which focused on unsuspecting women and young girls, including Susan. It was a horrifying glimpse into the mind of a predator, and it confirmed the fears that many had about the danger Susan might have faced.
The evidence was overwhelming, and Steven Powell was eventually charged with multiple counts of voyeurism and possession of child pornography. In a trial that further exposed the dark underbelly of the Powell family, he was convicted and sentenced to prison.
His conviction, while bringing some measure of justice, did little to soothe the pain and loss felt by those impacted by this tragedy. It was a bitter reminder that the ripple effects of abuse can extend far beyond the immediate victims, leaving scars on families, communities, and even those tasked with investigating these horrific crimes.
The Susan Powell case, with all its complexities and unanswered questions, challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about our society and to commit ourselves to creating a safer world for all.
It's a call to action, a reminder that we can't afford to be complacent when it comes to issues like domestic violence and child abuse.
We must remain vigilant, we must offer support, and we must never stop fighting for justice.
And on that note, it's important to remember that while the Susan Powell case is tragic and heartbreaking, it's not unique. Sadly, stories like Susan's are all too common.
Domestic violence affects millions of people across the globe. Regardless of their age, gender, race, or socioeconomic status, it's a hidden epidemic that thrives in silence and secrecy.
And that's why it's so important to talk about it, to raise awareness, and to break down the stigma that surrounds this issue. We need to create a culture where victims feel empowered to come forward, where they know they'll be believed and supported.
And we need to hold abusers accountable for their actions. The justice system must be equipped to handle domestic violence cases with sensitivity and expertise, ensuring that victims are protected and that perpetrators face the consequences of their crimes.
It's also crucial to invest in prevention programs, to teach young people about healthy relationships, and to promote a culture of respect and equality. We need to address the root causes of violence, including societal norms that perpetuate gender inequality and power imbalances.
It's a complex issue, but one that we can't afford to ignore. By working together, we can create a world where domestic violence is no longer tolerated, where victims are supported, and where everyone can live free from fear. And that's a goal worth striving for.
This deep dive into the Susan Powell case has been a sobering reminder of the darkness that can exist in our world. But it's also sparked a conversation about important issues that need our attention. It's a conversation that needs to continue, both within our communities and on a larger scale. We can't afford to let cases like Susan's fade from our collective memory. They must serve as a call to action, a reminder that we all have a role to play in preventing violence and creating a safer world for all.
And now it's important to remember that while the Susan Powell case is tragic and heartbreaking, there are real people whose lives have been shattered by this tragedy.
Susan, Charlie, and Braden deserve to be remembered not just as victims, but as individuals who loved, laughed, and dreamed.
Their story should inspire us to act, to fight for justice, and to create a world where such tragedies are no longer possible.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. What will you do today to make a difference in the fight against domestic violence?
Will you educate yourself about the issue?
Yeah. Will you reach out to someone who might be struggling?
Will you donate to an organization that supports victims?
Every action, no matter how small, can contribute to positive change.
Let's honor Susan, Charlie, and Braden's memory by working together to create a safer and more just world for all.
And remember, if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, you are not alone. There are resources available to help.
You can contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-7233 or visit their website at thehotline.org. They offer confidential support, information, and referrals to local resources.
There are people who care, and there is help available.
The Susan Powell case serves as a stark reminder of the hidden struggles so many face and the importance of speaking up and seeking help.
It's a call for all of us to be more aware, more compassionate, and more proactive in the fight against domestic violence.
Let's continue this conversation. Let's support victims, and let's work together to create a world where tragedies like this become a thing of the past.
And don't forget to subscribe to Crime Podcastle and our YouTube channel for more deep dives into true crime cases. We're constantly exploring new stories, uncovering hidden truths, and bringing you the most compelling and thought-provoking content.
Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of the Susan Powell case.
Stay curious, stay safe, and as always, stay vigilant.